Welcome, everybody. This is the Job Search for Educators virtual employer panel hosted by Career Services in collaboration with the College of Education and Health Sciences. My name is Katie Vagan. I am one of the assistant directors in the Office of Career Services, and I am excited to be here today to moderate today's panel. We have three wonderful panelists that are going to give you the rundown on everything related to the job search for educators. So just going to quickly introduce our panelists by name, and then we will jump in. So first, I'd like to introduce Mr. Jeremy Daly. Jeremy's the manager for Recruitment and Cultivation in the Office of Human Capital within Boston Public Schools. We also have Dr. Gina Williams, who is the Assistant Superintendent from East Bridgewater Public Schools. And last but not least, we have Dr. Patrick Lattuca. Did I say that correctly?
Yes, you did. Very good.
Okay,
Very good.
And Patrick is the superintendent for the Education Cooperative Connections Academy, or you may know it as TECCA, a virtual public school district in Massachusetts. So thank you all for being here. We really appreciate your accommodating us in a virtual setting. And again, I'm just going to get started with a series of questions, and then we'll definitely leave time at the end for the students and audience members to ask questions that they may have as well. So just to begin, if you don't mind just giving a quick background of your bio and kind of letting us know some details about how you got to where you are today, and then we'll jump into more specifics about the hiring process. So whoever would like to start first, feel free to give it a go.
All right, I guess I will, since no one did. Anyways, my name is Patrick Letucca. I am the superintendent of TECCA. For those that don't know what TECCA is, it's a virtual public school for the entire state of Massachusetts. We've been in existence for 6 years. We have both synchronous and asynchronous learning activities. So a lot of people, when you think of virtual school, you think of like a class where you're not kind of interacting with other people. Now I think people start understanding the synchronous part, but we have our enrollment cap was increased by the state this past fall to 2,700 students. We are kindergarten through grade 12. Prior to my experience as a virtual leader, I was a teacher. I taught at a detention facility in Brockton, where I taught at-risk youth. I was a 6th grade teacher and an administrator in both brick and mortar schools in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. And so that's just like a brief little overview of who I am. And I chose TECCA because I thought it was an innovative option for students that might not want the brick and mortar option. And I can get into that, another time, but that's a little bit about myself and the school that I'm part of.
Thanks, Patrick.
Sure.
Gina, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Gina Williams. I'm the assistant superintendent here in East Bridgewater. And I pride myself on telling people that I've pretty much been in every position in East Bridgewater. So really walking the walk and talking the talk. And now as a parent also of 3 sons in the school district, I started as a teaching assistant in the school system to a classroom teacher, assistant principal at the elementary level, principal at the elementary level, and then moving up. It was first created as a curriculum coordinator position, and then 7 years ago, it was created as an assistant superintendent position. So homegrown in the school district, but a huge proponent of advancing within. So, my biggest message always is get yourself into a school district, whether it's substituting or being a teaching assistant. That's where you can best show your talents and abilities, and that's how you advance. And I always put that first, knowing that's how I got my advantages as I move through the district. So that's my biggest message when I meet people who are looking to get into the teaching field.
Thank you. And Jeremy?
Yes. So I like to tell folks that, well, first of all, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us. I like to tell folks that education found me, actually. So I was in advertising, and I came back to Boston after living in Chicago for a couple of years, and I had a history degree from Northeastern, and a colleague's mom asked me to come in and help because the resident history teacher had gone to Afghanistan, fight for our country. So I stepped in as a substitute at a charter school, realized very quickly that I did not have the patience for 8th graders, and decided to make a transition to higher ed. I spent a long time in higher ed admissions before this opportunity kind of came across my table. And this one was unique to me because it allowed me not only to do what I was doing when it comes to recruitment of helping young people to find their path to college, but this was also now an opportunity to find those same young people and find them a path to educating the future educators and the future leaders of this world. So I thought that was super unique opportunity. It was a big shift for me, but I think it's been a wonderful space to be in thus far. And Boston is a unique opportunity for folks to really come in and experience that teaching experience. So thank you.
Great. Okay, so my first question for the panelists is, what is the hiring process like within your school district, and how has COVID potentially affected that?
Shall I go first again? Or should we just go?
Sure.
Okay, I might as well. So the hiring process, we typically use a platform called School Spring. School Spring, I think, is you may be familiar with. If not, a lot of public school districts, in my opinion, utilize that platform to do interview to post jobs. When it comes to interviewing, we've pivoted a little bit due to COVID-19. We used to do in-person interviews at our location. Although we are a virtual public school, we do have a central location where I am right now in Walpole, and we used to require in-person interviews, but since we've had the pandemic and since everything kind of shut down, all of our interviews now take place on a platform called Adobe Connect Live Lesson. Getting back to what I was saying earlier, if you were going to be a candidate that was for an interview, you'd want to really test that software out first because there's some downloading and things to do. But anyways, to long and the short of it, we do our postings in School Spring. Typically, they would be in-person interviews, but we've pivoted towards all virtual.
In East Bridgewater, we use the same platform, School Spring. I just recently signed East Bridgewater on to Handshake, thanks to Katie helping me navigate that. Like Patrick said, we typically will do in-person interviews. East Bridgewater is a relatively small school district. We're working in a hybrid learning model, so we do have students on campus Monday through Friday, as well as teachers. So our interview process has continued as long as it's been within people's comfort level. So we've given that option. If they want to come to the in-person interview, then certainly we provide that opportunity with the mask wearing and the social distancing. But certainly, probably for the first time, unless we've had candidates coming from out of state, this is the first year that we have also conducted virtual interviews. So we're really doing both ways of interviewing new potential candidates, and we'll continue that, for the foreseeable future. We're a Google district, so we rely heavily on the Google platform. All of our live synchronous teaching with students is Google Meets. All of our staff meetings and meetings within the district are all Google. So I know other area districts are using Google as well. So, certainly that's a platform to become familiar with because a lot of the teaching tools are within Google as well.
And for Boston Public Schools, we certainly utilize platforms such as School Spring. Our postings are on through Talent Ed as well. Most of them can be found on the BPS website. Because we have so many school buildings to service, the district has taken on what's called the early hiring pool, which is a actual job posting that we deliver in early November, which allows for candidates to apply. And then what we do is we begin to cultivate a pool of candidates, which we call our priority pool. And those priority pool candidates will be given, will be shared with our school leaders in advance of the March 1st, 2021 posting of their school's needs in terms of positions for that particular year. But as everybody knows, this has not been a normal year. for anybody. So typically for us, we have been utilizing Zoom to continue our interviewing processes, and we expect that to continue. We're hiring, the school year will typically wrap up in September, but due to COVID-19 this year, we've had an increase in teacher leaves requests for this fall. So we're currently have many requests to fill long-term sub positions. We also are working with our per diem sub department to ensure that we have enough candidates to fill short-term kind of sub positions as well. So we're doing a lot of that as well. So which I guess is a good thing, right? So we have a number of different types of opportunities within the district as well. But as far as platforms, most staff are using Zoom or Google Meets as well.
Great, that's very helpful. I wanted to just highlight one thing that Gina mentioned. So she mentioned something called Handshake. Hopefully many of our students are familiar with this now, but if not, Handshake is BSU's new career platform for internship and full-time job postings. And so we do encourage school districts to post there as well, just because it's sort of more of a direct connection to our students and alumni. So students definitely make sure to be looking on there in addition to School Spring and some of the other sites that have been mentioned. So my next question is, how many teacher openings do you typically have within your district and in what areas?
So TECCA had an enrollment cap prior to this year of 2,300. And I'm answering this question as we never reached it until last January. So every year we hired approximately 25 to 30 new teachers or new staff. And that includes, general education teachers, special education teachers. And as we grew, we also started to add in, social workers, school counselors, and things like that. On an average year, I would say probably still go with about 30. We are still growing. As I said, the state increased our cap to 2,700. We do have a bunch of postings that will be going out after our October board meeting for this year. And we do anticipate quite a number of new postings coming out probably again in the March-April timeframe for the 21-22 school year. And they're in all areas. They're really not concentrated. We did have a more heavily concentrated, and I do see this might happen again in the elementary area, because in our virtual school, for some reason, we've had a flip in interest where we have a 1,400 student wait list right now, and it's heavily weighted in the elementary area. So what we'd like to do is be able to help students and serve students, and be able to educate students. So we probably would staff that school probably more so in the middle and high school, although we do have current openings right now. What you would do if you are interested, we do have part-time opportunities right now. We do have substitute opportunities right now. And if you are interested in being a candidate for consideration, the simple way, again, go to School Spring, type in the word TECCA, and all of our postings will come up. But like I said, after our October board meeting, which is next Wednesday, actually at this time, 3:30, next Wednesday after that board meeting, I'm very confident that we'll be posting quite a number of new positions, just so you know.
That's great. Thank you. And Gina?
In East Bridgewater, we typically have anywhere between 10, 15 openings on a given year. Typically, we'll post in March for anticipated openings once teachers have put in for anticipated retirement. Other than that, usually a lot of our openings will come in June or maybe even July with teachers who have transferred to other districts or went to different career paths. This year has been different in the sense of we had many more openings than we typically do, just because we did allow staff to take advantage of family medical leave if they had underlying health conditions, and allowing them to take the year off, where we would then hire long-term subs in the positions. Usually at the elementary level, there's always a handful of openings there. It's a little bit more challenging in the secondary, especially with singleton courses where you only have 1 or 2 staff members that teach that area of math or science. The turnover is not as often as it is in the other grade levels. But as I said, every year, 10 to 15. If people are looking for an entry level of, a teaching assistant position, sometimes those don't occur until even just a week or two before school starts, because a lot of times our teaching assistants are certified teachers. They get last minute positions, as well as some of the long-term leaves. This year, and I think even still now, we have openings on School Spring trying to fill some short and long-term leaves that we have. Unfortunately, with COVID, sometimes we have staff members who become close contacts with people outside of work and they have to quarantine, and we're looking for just, a 2-week short-term leave. And then we always have maternity leaves and medical leaves that occur as well. So like has been said, to continuously look at School Spring, because there's constantly things being added to it.
For Boston Public Schools, I think for us, we are a huge district, as everybody knows. So we're servicing about 5,400 kids, 54,000 kids. Excuse me.
Oh, goodness.
And that's.
I didn't know that. That's a lot. Holy mackerel.
Yeah. So across 123 school buildings. So typically over a year we'll have about 900 or so teaching positions that become open. And usually those are filled by approximately about 250, 300 external candidates. So those are folks that are outside of the district, new to BPS as a whole. The just to get into the district, it still can be very competitive. So it's always best to have that additional endorsement. So we certainly are looking for those that have not only the SEI endorsement, but moderate disabilities on top of, your specific teaching concentrations. ESL and STEM educators are always a priority for us as well. So that's where we are.
Great, thank you. And that's kind of a good segue to the next question. So can you share what particular skills and experiences do you look for in a candidate, and how can our students set themselves apart?
Well, if you're graduating and you've earned your certification, you already have the entry point. So the skills that we're looking for, like TECCA is looking for beyond the entry point, is technology, a knowledge with technology. As I said, our school is virtual. So we do synchronous and asynchronous learning activities with our students. So you will be teaching, but in a different way. So for those of you that have had your practicum experiences in a completely brick and mortar world, that's not a negative. But what I'm saying is, we would want some experience of you knowing how to interact in this virtual capacity, because this is how you're teaching. Similar to this, you're going to have students in your classroom, you're going to have manipulatives and different types of learning tools or virtual tools you can bring into the class. So that's what I would say. We look really for, do you have a technological background? Having 2 daughters, both in college, that seems to be almost a given, because again, with a lot of students and you're interacting with technology all the time and with different types of communication tools. But in my opinion, what sets you apart from other people is reaching out. And I know that sounds kind of interesting, but like if you've applied for a position, what's going to set yourself apart from everybody else that's applied for the position is just reaching out to the person or me. Patrick Lattuca, I just wanted to let you know I applied for this. If you could just pass my name along to the screening committee chair. I'm really interested in TECCA and learning more about that. I'm telling you, those simple, for me at least, and again, different people have different perspectives on that, but for me, it says, okay, this person's interested. Like they took the time to reach out to me about a position. And so they're in my opinion, they're worth an interview. And that's what I typically will say to the screening committee members. This person reached out. They must have some motivational skill, to do so. All I ask is that you please give them an interview. And I never get involved in the interview process. And so that's typically how I'd say it. Technological skills, and reach out to the school to set yourself apart when, in fact, you've done that actual application or whatever.
That's great to hear. And I definitely do want to know if that's similar for the other districts, because I imagine if Jeremy had 900,
Right.
plus openings, that might be a little harder. So every district has a unique preference, I guess. So Gina, do you want to go next to go in our order we've established?
Sure. And very similar, certainly on the surface, it's the resume. To Jeremy's point earlier, any background with special education, working in inclusive practices, knowing that all of our classrooms are so diverse now, having that background with special education is really important. So noting that on a resume, if you have that experience, would definitely get some attention. And to Patrick's point, absolutely. When you make connections with people, it is what sets you apart. And a lot of times it will be someone who did observation hours with a particular teacher, and they'll just reach out to that teacher and let them know that they've applied. And that teacher will then, reach out to central office to say, so-and-so has just put in an application. And even people that have connected with me, to Patrick's point, I say I can get you in the door. What you do from there is up to you. But sometimes we're getting 200, 300 resumes, especially at the elementary level, and you need that entry point. So that extra effort that you make to get the attention that you need to even be able to be in front of an interview team is worthwhile. Once you're in front of the interview team, to me, what always comes through is flexibility. Someone can have the content and pedagogy down in their area of practice. But as you know now with COVID, flexibility is key. We need teachers who are going to work well with their teammates. We need teachers who are going to be able to adjust when things get thrown off. In a typical year, the schedule might get thrown off. On a year like this, you're now teaching students at home and students in person simultaneously. So that flexibility coming through in an interview will definitely bode well.
I think for Boston, first and foremost, obviously, Boston is an urban school district. So teachers that fully understand the linguistic and cultural educational needs of our students is critical. So really making sure, you're exploring our district for the right reasons, and you understand the needs of our students. Classroom experience is always good, but it's not available to try to create those opportunities and volunteer and those kinds of things is a great way. I actually used to work at Massasoit, so I know there's plenty of opportunities in Brockton for you to go and volunteer at the Boys and Girls Clubs and things of that nature as well. So put yourself in those environments where you can not only be offering yourself as a resource to these young people, but be hopefully sharpening your skills to be future educators. Licensed candidates are always a premium. So please, making sure that you're learning about the licensing process. Right now, during the pandemic, there's an opportunity for an emergency license. So you want to make sure you're exploring that and taking advantage of that if you qualify for those things. We have information on the teachboston.org website that kind of gives you some more background in terms of whether you qualify for those things or not. Understand the importance and of the experience of working with the children, but it's also important to understand the experience of working with the families and family engagement and how that piece is a part of that child's learning process as well. So any opportunities you have to learn and be a part of that process as well is also, I think, very, very important. And you want to create a safe, welcoming space for a classroom, right? So does not rely on disciplinary tactics, if you will, or practices to establish order. So you need some experience in maybe some restorative practices, restorative approaches that really look to bringing order and discipline to a classroom without, using traditional disciplinary practices. Takes accountability for our students' learning is huge for us. And we want folks to have that experience where they're differentiating that instructional piece to that as well. So we have created a number of different documents, from competency documents as well as different things to really share with candidates on the teachboston.org website, which I think is a terrific guide for, structuring cover letters and things of that nature as well. So.
Great, thank you. So if you can talk about your tips for effective resumes, cover letters, and even the interviewing process, I'm going to kind of combine those all for sake of time. If there's key things that, again, really set a candidate apart, whether you're reviewing those documents or seeing them in an interview, and what does that look like for you?
Sure. Since we're halfway through, let's change the order up a little bit because we still need each other's thunder.
I was just about to say the same thing. You want me to go first this time?
Yeah, you can go. Why don't you go first this time? And at the very end, Gina, we'll have you go first.
There we go.
Fair enough. Kind of piggybacking off what I was just saying, we do provide some sample resumes and cover letters on the website as well. Try to keep your resume to 1 or 2 pages if you can. Utilize margins, those kinds of things. Try to lead with education, then licensing, or at least cite the anticipated date in terms of when you're planning to apply or you're planning to test. So pending is fine. Just give us an idea of where you're going to be as a licensed educator. Be as descriptive as possible. I think that's a big thing for me. How many kids are you working with? How in depth? Are you familiar with an IEP? Are you doing any assessments as it relates to those things? Are you learning how to do assessments? Have you taken any courses or classes as it relates to doing that process? So again, having that knowledge and being able to share that in depthly, I think is very, very valuable to you on your resume. As it relates to the cover letter, a separate cover letter must address each position. That's kind of a standard thing for us. But again, you can certainly structure it in a certain way, but making sure that you speak to the skills that you have that are specifically to what you saw in this job description. And really research the school online, see, have a background knowledge of what the school's needs are, I should say. The informational interviews with people that might be maybe in contact with folks within the school, whether that be students, principals, etc., families. Applying to as many jobs as possible, I think, is always a good one. I think with us, there's so many positions. A lot of folks will kind of take themselves out because it might be asking for one thing versus another. So really making sure that, sometimes experience may be a transformational qualification, and the principal might be willing to take a chance. You know what I mean? Want to give you a chance as an opportunity to really build yourself within that school district or within that school building. There's also an opportunity to take advantage of maybe co-teaching opportunities as well. So that may be something that particular school may be looking for. So don't necessarily rule yourself out on always on the job description. As it relates to interviewing, I think the question was a little bit more about, what kind of interview questions. I think more so than to be worried about the questions themselves, I would say really, making sure you're comfortable with Zoom, right? Start there. Understand what Zoom capabilities are. Making sure that you are technologically comfortable, not only as like sitting in an interview space, but understanding that this might be a workspace, right? So how you present yourself and how to adjust to that might be something to really be thinking about as well. What drives you, right? What drives you for this work is something that will come up on I think, a lot of interviews. What is your, do you have a demo? How have you worked on your demo? Have you presented your demo to family members and really getting some feedback as to how that looks, how that is presented? I think so. Those are the kind of things I would be thinking about. Let's see, what else? So, understanding that you're not going to know everything and no school leaders are expecting you to. So have a growth mindset. You want to learn. You're willing to do whatever it takes to learn. and do it with a level of humility. I think those things will certainly serve you well in the long run. Some red flags: don't ask about benefits right off the beginning. I know it's important. It's certainly, but it is not a priority for the school leader at the moment. So refer to those children versus our children. Those kinds of things are really, really important, right? Are you really trying to put yourself in that school climate, that school culture, the school atmosphere? So be aware of how you're kind of presenting yourself in that regard. Only wanting to work in a certain population. I think, a lot of times folks will have that, mindset, again, be willing to come in and support a school building in any capacity. Asking about discipline at the school, again, will sometimes help, but it's certainly kind of be a red flag. Are you more concerned with, how you're going to manage your classroom or the discipline, or are you really trying to establish some relationships with students? So be prepared to present a lesson plan remotely. I think that's going to be a big one. You got to be ready to kind of step up and really give in and understand what that process is like and learn it. So.
Thank you. And just quickly to go off of that, Jeremy, a student had asked if what you meant by demo. I'm assuming that is what you just mentioned, a demo lesson plan during the interview process.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, great. And so that's happening virtually right now as well.
Correct.
Gotcha. Thank you. There we go. And just while we're just talking about those items, I did want to let everyone know that my colleague just put our resume writing guide, cover letter guide, and interviewing prep guide all in the chat. So feel free to check out those links as well. But why don't we move on to our other panelists and their thoughts on those questions?
Go ahead, Gina.
I'll stay at second. So as far as the resume, definitely if you can keep it to the one page. And I know even when I was in college, I was, told about the font size and use the Times Roman, and it does make a difference. You don't want to try to get too fancy with your resume that it's not visually pleasing to the eye. So try to keep it streamlined, making sure the pertinent information is included in there. It's great for you to be able to share some additional activities that you've been involved in when you're at the interview, but I would say to keep it to the one page and keep strictly to what pertains to the position you're applying to. I think to Jeremy's point, the more information that we know right up front, the more likely you're going to be called in for an interview. Where do you stand with your licensure? Do you have you completed your degree? So having those dates and information on the resume will just keep the process moving and not creating a halt for you. As far as the cover letter, I would say the same, make them specific to who you're sending it to. I can't tell you how many times I've read a cover letter and they didn't change the former school that they wrote their cover letter to. So I've seen, the other schools that they've been interviewing for or applying to. And, if you can always change it to whom it may concern and direct it to a person. And I always advise, direct it to the building principal. East Bridgewater is a small enough district. We only have 3 school buildings. So if you're elementary, you're going at early childhood, you're going to Central School. Elementary, you're either Central or Mitchell. And if you're secondary, you're going to the junior senior. So it's not too many names and places to keep track of. And if you're very interested in a school district, then take the time to go on the website, find out the names of the administrators, and direct your cover letter to them. Within your cover letter, anytime you can make connections to the district, even if you're not familiar with the district, spend the time to go through the website to find out about the strategic plan, some of the initiatives, some of the recent events that have gone on. And it just shows that you have an interest in the school district and you've taken the time to get to know the school district as well. I agree with the interview, although, it is maybe on your mind, try to keep the conversation away from salary or benefits. Always think of a question to ask, because at least it shows the people that are interviewing you that you're really invested and interested in this school and you want to learn as much as you possibly can. One go-to that I always share with people is, what more can you take advantage of to help you grow as a teacher? What you could be doing on your own, what the school may offer you for support and mentorship so that you can be a continuous learner on your journey throughout your teaching career. So, I would say that those were the most pertinent things within the process of applying and interviewing.
Now I know what it's like to have all the answers already given out. So I agree. I agree with much of what both Jeremy and Gina has said. The only things I would like to add is, same thing with the cover letter. Proofread it too. You're applying for an educational job or a job in education. Personalize it. If it's to, me, put it to my name. If you don't know, make a phone call to find out who is the screening committee head. If it's a building principal, like Gina was saying, you're not really sure, assign it to the principal. Personalize it. A lot of times, as I think Gina said earlier, and I think Jeremy, you get hundreds of applicants sometimes for a position. That first paragraph, in my opinion, is very important in terms of who's it to, and you make it you go right into, your candidacy for this role, because it catches the person's attention. So that's my advice on the cover letters. When it comes to the resumes, I think Jeremy said it, and I think Gina said the same thing. Very professional, font, organized, and the way I like to see them organized is your name, your contact information, your education, and I like to see if you're certified or not. Because again, when you have a lot of applicants, there are different screening mechanisms people use to say, okay, we've got 400 people here. What's the first level of screening? Who's certified? Who's not? And so make sure that's listed on there, or where you are in that process. If you're in School Spring and it asks you for references, make sure your references are in there. If it asks you to have transcripts, make sure your transcripts are in there. Because sometimes the screening committees, depending on the screening committee, will go to those various different application materials to say, which one of these 2 out of these 10 are we going to choose for the final 11th candidate we're going to interview. So all those little small details, in my opinion, matter. When it comes to the interview, we've all been there. Okay, we've all been in the interview chair, and we've all understand the types of stress people go through in terms of that process. Try to take a deep breath. When I run interviews, I always say to the candidate, we do have scripted questions, but let's look at it as more of a conversation. If you have a question, please feel free to, ask it. Other screening committees don't do it that way, but I'm saying try to be comfortable. Try to be yourself. I mean, I'm looking for a degreeness of fit. Who would fit well at TECCA? And the screening committees. You're also looking for a good fit. Do I like what this school is like? If you don't know an answer to a question, don't try to fake it. That's another piece of advice. Like if I'm saying, oh, can you talk to me a little bit about the responsive classroom or the PBIS philosophy? Have you ever implemented it? And don't say, oh yeah, and you're thinking PBIS stands for something and you're just trying to muddle your way through it. I would rather see somebody be honest and say, I'm not really familiar with that term. Can you explain to me because maybe I do have some experience at. Honesty is the best policy. And what was the last thing I had to say about interviews? And always have a meaningful question. Oh, I totally agree with benefits that both of them have said. Please don't ask how much does this pay, as part of the process. Again, it's something that's kind of a no-no in interviews. But have a meaningful question that you really care about. Like, what is something that you really want to know about the position and or the school that is meaningful? On the flip side, and don't go off and ask 15 questions. Have a couple, because you'll have the opportunity. And my final thing to say on this is often candidates are asked, can you talk to me about one of your greatest strengths? And on the flip side, what's an area that you would like to improve upon? Myself and my screening committee, the screening committees that I've seen, we don't want to hear you're a perfectionist. And I'm saying I've heard that many, 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 many times. So when you think about this in terms of how would you really want, I mean, I know how I've answered it. We've all, how do you anticipate that as a potential question and be true in your answer? And I wouldn't say, like, if it's an elementary teaching position, that if you're a poor speller, I wouldn't say I would like to be better at spelling and I'd like to be better at math. Like, but think of one that would like really be a true, genuine area that you would like to improve upon. I'll tell you mine that I've said, and it's true. I want to be bilingual, and it is a weakness of mine. And I do truly see that as one when I'm speaking with parents that are multi-languages, and I feel like there's a barrier there, and I'm working on that. But that was a true answer, and that's a true weakness of mine. So my point is that, so those are my answers. Be true, be real. If you don't know an answer, don't try to fake it through, get clarity. Ask a meaningful question, don't have 30 of them, maybe 1, 2, or 3 questions at the end. And anticipate a question that's going to ask you for an area that you would like to improve upon, because that's again, not in all districts, but that's a standard question that I've heard and that our committees ask.
That's great. That's all such helpful information. So we have a little bit less than 15 minutes, and so I do want to open it up to the audience for questions. So there were a couple that were in the chat, and at this point, I'd say we don't necessarily have to have everybody respond. So if you kind of agree with your colleague panelists, you can just give the thumbs up. But if you have something to add, of course, feel free. But one question is it okay? Oh, sorry, above. Should we bring a portfolio with us? And do you prefer a physical copy or a digital version of the portfolio?
I mean, I can answer from my perspective. Every district does this differently, and I think every screening committee does it differently. Typically for us, the way TECCA does it is we will ask you for one if we would like to see one in the second round. It sometimes becomes a little disjointed, at least in TECCA's interviews, where all of a sudden we're going through and, how does this work and how does this fit into this process? It sometimes makes the process a little disjointed. I'm only speaking from TECCA's perspective, but we would ask you if we would want something like that, some type of documentation or portfolio or whatever.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. I would only add on that, you want to prepare as much as possible for the things that you're being asked to do, right? So you don't want to pile on extra stuff. If make sure you know the stuff that are needed for initial interview, because that's plenty of information as well. Long before you even touch a classroom full of kids, there's a lot of information that needs to be learned about you. So I'd say make sure you're focused on, making sure you're as prepared as possible for that initial interview. And likewise, we'll let you know if we need anything else.
And I would agree with that. I want the time of an interview to be strictly focused on getting to know the candidate a little bit better. And I always feel bad when, they have taken all the time and energy to put this portfolio together and we don't have the time to go through it. And then they leave it for us. And I feel like, they've left a treasure behind that they're going to want to make sure they get back. So I would say the same, certainly if you want to create a digital one that you can send to us, an electronic one that you don't need back, then great. But to take one with you, like I said, it makes us feel bad that we don't look at it, but we certainly want to use the interview time to get to know you personally.
I think
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, no, really quick. Something that we've been thinking about as BPS, maybe asking our candidates to submit again is, again, being in the times that we're in, taking advantage of the technology, right? So you have the ability now to jump on a Zoom or and record yourself presenting, right? Maybe have your nieces and nephews, right? And you present a Saturday afternoon lesson to them and record that. But at least it's something that we can tangibly look at and see, how do you engage with kids, et cetera, et cetera.
That's great. And I was just going to say, perhaps if you create a digital portfolio, that's something that you could put a link in your thank you email after the interview. So, may not have time during the interview, but if they like you as a candidate, they want to look further into your background and your materials, they have the chance to do that when they have free time. Okay, next question. Is it okay to ask the interviewers what resources, training, and supports are in place to support their current educators?
I think that's a total appropriate question. I mean, to Patrick's point, you want the interview to be as much of a conversation as possible. So, asking them to share with you what has worked for them, what resources have been most beneficial for them. We just hope that our teachers who are on the panel have things to share.
That is true, Gina. I like that.
Hi,
Yeah.
Mrs. Sabrina.
I'd agree with that as well. I think it's an appropriate question for colleagues. So a lot of times you'll have an interview where there are other teachers within the building in that room, as well as the principal. So I think that's a perfectly good question for both.
I would agree as well.
Okay. So, do you prefer, or are you more likely to look for beginning teachers to have a bachelor's degree alone or a bachelor's and master's?
We're looking for the best fit. And so it really, and honestly, it doesn't really matter. I hate to say it like that in terms of degrees and stuff like that. We've hired people that are right out of college. I mean, we've hired some BSU people. Hired people right out of college. We've hired people that have 2 degrees. We've hired PhD people as teachers. Hired people with 1 year experience, no experience. It's really about the degree. I keep going back to this, but the degreeness of fit. How well does do we see this person fitting within this in this culture of this school, within the culture of this teaching team, things like that. So that's how I'd answer that question.
I think there was a time when there was the concern that people would outprice themselves when we would, be hiring people at a bachelor's level to make one amount. And then if they had a master's, they would obviously be in another category. And that has gone by the wayside now that, DESE requires everybody to have a master's degree. So I would say for East Bridgewater, that wouldn't be, any factor in there as to whether they have a bachelor's degree or a master's degree. To Patrick's point, we're looking at the candidate and who the best fit. I mean, probably not good to say on a college panel right now, but as someone with multiple degrees, that it doesn't always mean that they're the right fit for the position, regardless of the number of degrees that they have. So if you're looking to get your master's degree, absolutely, go for it. But don't think just because you have a master's degree, you're going to have a leg up on the bachelor's degree candidates.
Yes, I would agree with that as well. And I think for much of what we do, a lot of our decisions are made at the school level. So our school leaders are really banking on that connection that they do make with those candidates within that interview, right? So, and a lot of times, that decision will allow them to, or the flexibility of our district will allow them to be able to give that candidate an opportunity. We have a number of folks that are current BPS educators that are working towards master's degrees. We have a number of folks that are working towards their licensing and those things as well. And it is the flexibility of BPS that allows them to be able to do that. And so it's important to make that connection, and there's opportunities for school leaders to advocate on your behalf if they feel that you're a talent and that you could be a benefit to their school and their children.
Right. We had a student ask, is it okay to talk about or ask about benefits after the first interview? This is a person who sounds like a career changer, and in their previous background, that would be appropriate to ask, but in education, is it not okay?
I would say, in my opinion, if you're a finalist candidate, like typically there's 2 rounds, and in different districts do it different ways. If you're in the so there's a screening committee, there's round 1, and if there's another round, I wouldn't see an issue with that really, because at that second round, you're kind of like figuring out the school's trying to say, is this the right candidate for me? You're trying to say, is this the right fit for me? You want to have all the variables in play, because if it's not going to work financially for you, then it's a waste of everyone's time. And so I think at that point it might be worth exploring. But you also have to remember that salaries are public, so you can actually look that up if you take the time. In most districts, will have a salary scale of some sort or a contract, especially if they're unionized, on a website. So you'll be able to get a general understanding or a general idea of what the salary range may or may not be. When it comes to benefits like health, dental, and vision, I mean, that's a little bit more complicated. But and that's just my opinion. When you're a finalist and I'm meeting with two people, let's say a screening committee brought two candidates to me, I would have no problem saying, you know, this is what the compensation for this position is, because if it's going to say that one's going to not want it and the other is, well, then why waste all the time on that? So that's just again, that's my opinion on it. A lot of people have different views on this.
I just want to jump back in. I just want to be clear on something too. Like there are situations where that is an appropriate question, right? So I don't want to put people in a situation where like, I can't ask this question. There's a lot going on in this world right now. There are folks with pre-existing conditions where if you feel that question is pertinent to you doing your job and doing your job effectively, then yes, I'm certainly think that it's a appropriate question to be asking at that particular moment. But again, it's more so very much like my colleague is saying, it's making sure that it's the appropriate question for the moment is more right. So the important thing than whether or not the question should be asked.
Thank you. And probably how they phrase it as well, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we have just a couple of questions. I want to be cognizant of everyone's time. So how much weight do you place on an applicant's professional reference?
I'm sorry, on the applicant's professional what?
References.
So, Gina, why don't you go first this time?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Sure. So certainly, I think just as important as the resume and the cover letter, the references play a key part. I mean, certainly, maybe not in the first round of interviews, but as we start moving into final interviews, and one thing that we always ask is, can we contact these references? Certainly, if somebody's making a move from one district to the other and they haven't notified their employer that they're looking elsewhere, we want to make sure that we don't have that awkward conversation. But I think it's really important. I mean, we have a standard protocol for reference checks and asking pertinent questions about their experience with the candidate and, you know, how well they've worked as a team member and things like that. So I definitely think having references that are in the field of education that can speak to your abilities as a potential candidate in education. But then I think it's fine to have a personal reference as well. But we always make sure that at least one of your references is for a current or most recent supervisor that you've worked for.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. And I think it's, you know, I don't, you'd be surprised, but you want to make sure you're actually asking references of people that are willing to advocate for you.
That is a good point.
You know what I mean? Be very selective about, you know, who you're asking to be your references as well. And that, you know, there are certainly advocates of you and can speak candidly about you, not only obviously as an educator, but character-wise as well.
I just want to make one addition. So getting back to what I was saying with School Spring, if it's 3 references, make sure there's 3 references in there. Getting back to Gina's point, I think, you know, definitely one of them has to be a supervisor or a current or within your context. But getting back to Jeremy's point, kind of on the other side of this, make sure you ask the reference and get their approval to use them as a reference. I mean, I've called a reference and said, I didn't even know I was a reference for so-and-so. And that's awkward in itself. And so typically, as I think Gina had said, that's a second round type thing, but make sure it's there. Like I typically, or none of the screening committee that are at TECCA, nobody calls a reference before an interview. Typically it's the interview. We come up with a finalist candidate or candidates, and then the reference calls begin. I require that all screening committees call at least 2. And as I said, one of them has to be closely connected with the student recently and be a supervisor in some type of a supervisory capacity.
Great. Okay. It's funny. All the questions come in right at the end of the panel. So I'm trying to go through what we can. just quickly, do your districts have any flexibility with candidates who are still in the process of getting licensure, so maybe not yet licensed?
Yes, put it on your resume as pending.
Certainly,
Yeah, I'm sorry.
oh, no. Certainly we would consider it. However, we would first look for candidates that hold the certification, but it's definitely not a deal breaker if we're looking to fill a position.
I hate to be the spoiler of this. This is where we all TECCA we don't. We require certification in hand when of date of hire.
And that's, I think a lot of our students get confused. They think, well, it's middle of the semester, I don't have my license yet, but they understand that, if the job isn't going to start until after you graduate, you should be good with the way.
Oh yeah, and we've hired people not necessarily for next year, although we will be probably coming up soon as we expand. And part of our, when we go through the entire process and we offer what's called an offer of acceptance letter that the person signs, the candidate signs, it would say contingent upon certification being achieved by whatever date.
Perfect. Okay, I think we have one more question. So
this is fun.
I'm glad you're all having fun. This is good. So earlier you mentioned the importance of having connections with schools as something that helps a candidate stand out. Can you give recommendations on how do they make those connections?
Go by. Pick the two closest to you, the two closest Boys and Girls Club. I mean, there's just being at BSU, there's a ton of stuff in Brockton. Just, call Brockton High. They've got several programs over there, some evening stuff. So, you don't necessarily have to mess with your classroom time stuff. And that's just from me knowing that stuff is there. You know what I mean? So I'm sure there's other towns and districts that would love the opportunity to have, a young person come in and share their knowledge about, being in college and what the rigors of college are and all that kind of stuff too. So, but it also maybe just shadowing a teacher, right? Just being in that classroom for a half hour of that other teacher delivering her lesson and you watching her deliver that lesson. So yeah, just go do it.
I don't know how much flexibility students have with choosing their pre-practicum or their practicum placements or student teaching, but certainly that's a way to make connections, choosing those environments where you want to ultimately be working. A lot of the candidates that we've taken in for teaching assistants or teaching jobs actually started by, conducting coursework in the school and doing their observation hours and things like that and making connections that way. Even substituting on school breaks.
Mm-hmm. I would totally agree with everything that was just said. And also, in my opinion, volunteer in your community with kids or with the interest of what you're trying to move yourself into. Because first of all, it's good for the resume. But secondly, you never know who knows who. It's a very small world. And every now and then it's like, oh, wait a second. So-and-so, I'm not going to say any names. I see some names in here, but so-and-so was part of the tutoring club at the YMCA. Oh, I know the person over there. I'm going to give them a call and see, Right. So you never know. So you try to branch out and create these different networks of connections with people within the passion that you like. Meaning, it's good to volunteer at anything, whatever, but if try to gear it towards students and kids and whatever passion it is in terms of a professional career. And I totally agree with Gina. Also, I think Jeremy said this too. Substitute. If you can balance. I mean, TECCA, we're looking for 0.25 soon. Grading support and TAs. And stuff like that. We're going to be piloting new programs. Get involved in those schools, so people know your name. I think
we're doing remote subs, right? So you don't even have to leave your dorm room.
Actually, we do, right? Three of our hires came from people that were working or volunteering or helping out within TECCA over the last 6 months. And again, I'm not saying it happens for everybody, but I mean, going back to what Gina said at the very beginning of this, establish yourself in a district, get yourself known in a community. And if you can build your capacity of whatever your goals are within that district, and sometimes you could stay, sometimes you move along, but you know, the more people that you can connect with within your passion, I think the better.
Right. I think the other part too, I think one thing that I've really learned from the folks within my district that is that truly strong educators never stop learning, right? And they'll continue to network and learn from other educators. So they'll watch other educators and take little pieces of how they deliver certain things and add it to their game, right? And really try to refine and really kind of continue to build on what they're doing. So you need to do that, right? You need to start to create that network for yourself, so you can get your skill set to a point where people are doing that with you, right? They're coming to you for certain skill sets and certain things. And that's really what it's about, is right, really being refined and in a particular area, whereas you can really share that knowledge with other folks. The other part of that is there are other national organizations within your concentrations, right there. So there's an organization for elementary school teachers, for history teachers. Join those organizations. Use them as a part to start to build that network. And they'll share with you the educators that are already in the organization that are local, right? So you can reach out to them, and that will be your connection to them, right? I'm a science teacher, just like you. I just joined the organization, but I see that you're also in Massachusetts. I would love to have a cup of coffee with you and just pick your brain about science. Those kinds of things, they don't happen anymore. I don't know why, but I think those are the kinds of things that'll truly kind of get you where you want to be. You want to be in the Boston Public School District, you should be reaching out to educators of color and talking to them on a regular basis and have them on your speed dial. Like when a Haitian kid acts up and he starts yelling at me in French, like, how do you deal with that? You know what I mean? Like, that's a real thing that happens on a daily basis, right? So it's those kinds of knowledge and then understanding, like, how those environments and those situations will be critical to your success as an educator. So the more folks you can have in your network to be able to kind of share that information and ask those candid, tough questions, because there are going to be some tough questions, tough things that kids are going to say to you that you don't know how to answer. But you need somebody in your network to be able to kind of bounce that off of and be like, if a kid calls me racist, like, well, how do I deal with that? You know what I mean? How do I answer that? So.
Those are all great points. And just to add to that, not all of our students are familiar with LinkedIn, but there are over 42,000 BSU alumni on LinkedIn. And so it's an amazing tool to be able to go on and search for alumni that are educators and teachers, and we can show you how to use it. So keep that in mind, because that's a great way to find those connections. If you don't already have somebody that's a friend of a friend or a family member, utilize the alumni population to reach out for these types of connections that everyone's been referring to. So it looks like a lot of our folks are starting to hop off and are just being so thankful. And so I want to do the same thing. I want to thank our three panelists, Jeremy, Gina, and Patrick. This has been an amazing conversation, and I think our students got so much out of it. I really want to thank you again for taking the time out of your day. This is obviously probably one of the most challenging school years that you've all been a part of. So the fact that you were able to set aside some time for Bridgewater State is really wonderful. So thank you all so much. And thank you all for being in the audience today and being part of our panel discussion. Hope everyone has a wonderful fall semester and finishes up the year strong, and stay safe and stay healthy. So
teachboston.org or recruitment at Boston Public Schools for email.
Thank you, everybody. And if anyone wants to reach out to me directly, just Google TECCA, and you can just go under staff, and I'm right there. My email address is right there. Send me an email if you have any follow-up questions or anything like that. But I appreciate the opportunity.
And East Bridgewater is ebps.net. So check us out on our website, and our contact information is there as well. Thank you so much for allowing me to be part of the panel.
Yes, thank you. Have a great night, everybody.
thank you all so much.
Study hard.
Take care, students.